Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Lisa Gardner, a #1 New York Times bestseller about Still See You Everywhere. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I told Lisa before we started recording that I'm going to be a bit of a fanboy on this. I just loved everything about this. Down the street from me is a street called Atoll Street, and I thought it was someone's last name, but I've learned now that that's not true. So will you tell the audience what an atoll is?
So yeah, an atoll is a remote, it's not quite an island because generally there's not fresh water, but it's formed when a volcano erupts in the middle of the ocean, briefly crests, and you'll get the coral forming on top and then collapses again. So you have basically a lot of coral reefs. You have a very, very shallow kind of island, and can make for an amazing ecosystem, especially for birds and ocean life. And I got to spend time in an extremely remote one, and it was such a great paradise. I used it for murder.
I love it. I love it. It's a perfect setting. So now I want to know. So I think a lot of people say, oh, if I could just simply put down my phone and didn't have to see the numbers pop up on social media and text and email, I would love that. Is that true? Did you love being away from connectivity, or is it a little bit daunting?
It turned out to be daunting. So I was invited by the Nature Conservancy to go to this atoll that's basically on the equator. You fly to Hawaii and you're another 3-hour private charter to get to the atoll because it's not populated because, again, there's no fresh water. So it's just a research station and they use rainwater to drink, and there's no electricity. There's no plumbing. I mean, you are rustic. And as you can imagine, no connectivity. So I'm like, this will be great. We all now in this day and age aspire to be off the grid,
right?
And down our phones. I mean, I was anxious within the first 30 seconds. I watched the plane leave and I realized I'm now with 12 total strangers in a place where emergency medevac, they're telling us, is 3 days away. And I can't even text for help.
No. And I think that was one of the things that really caught me and captured me, because I do think so many of us say, oh Lord, if I could just have one day without all this stuff, all these trappings. But I think that's not true, because I don't really want to go back to wondering who called on the rotary dial phone. I really don't. I want to look at the phone and see who I missed or who I skipped.
It's the good news, bad news of it all. I mean, the one thing I will say, it takes something. So Still See You Everywhere now takes place in this remote atoll, because if you're a fiction writer really trying to isolate characters, trying to create that sense of danger and drama, and anything could happen and there's no means of getting help, it's kind of really difficult in today's modern world. But hey, if you ship someone to a remote atoll, you can get it done.
You can, and you did it so well. So now let's get into a little bit of the meat of the book. Will you give us a setup of what Still See You Everywhere is about?
So Still See You Everywhere features Frankie Elkin, and she's kind of an amateur sleuth. She's an everyday average person, and she's obsessed with working missing persons cold cases. But this case is a really weird one, even by her standards. She's basically summoned to death row in Texas to meet with a female serial killer who will be executed in 3 weeks' time. And just to be clear, not repentant. The beautiful butcher. Yeah, if she could get out tomorrow, she'd be more than happy to kill 19 men all over again. I thought she was really a lot of fun to write, to be honest. In her younger years, her little sister, whom she adored, disappeared at age 5. She believes was kidnapped by a certain gentleman and essentially human trafficked. So she's just received word her sister might still be alive. And so her dying wish is that Frankie find her, because she'd be 17 now. She's still a young girl. And, even serial killers can love their baby sisters and want some peace.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you started the book from the serial killer's perspective, so to speak. I mean, it set up such a holy cow. Whoops, like to said something a lot stronger, which would have been true because I really did say the stronger version more than one time. So but it's such a deliciousness to it that, we see that this unrepentant serial killer, there's some type of humanity within her. And I think I'm going to steal a word from another friend of mine who's an author and a podcaster, Marie Sutro, and her word is hope. And
Yeah.
I find that in Still See You Everywhere, every character has some kind of hope, which made it I could insert myself as a reader because
Yeah.
there's hope there. Even with the serial killer has a bit of hope, right?
Well, and I think it's important in suspense. I'm known for writing really gritty books and can be quite emotional and can be very dark. And there are aspects of Still See You Everywhere, I think you can agree, get quite dark. But a great thriller cannot be hopeless because the whole reason we are reading them is to see the problem solving, to see the heroes rise to the occasion, to have that black moment where it feels like, oh my God, they'll never be able to solve this problem. They're all going to die on this remote atoll. And then, oh, wait, what a brilliant idea. It's the solutions we're looking for because people are always like, how can you write so dark? And I'm like, because the characters aren't. Frankie does what she does because she believes she can make a difference. She believes she can save this young woman. She believes she can go to a remote atoll and when things start going really south, save her friends. And that's kind of what
Absolutely.
it's all about. That's what we're reading for.
Well, it is. And, so Frankie sets herself up, and the book is first person in Frankie's point of view, which I loved. So let's ask a little bit about that. So was writing in first person easier than third for this book, or do you prefer to write in first?
I don't have a hard science to it all. It'll sound kind of goofy, but Frankie always came to me in first person. And I feel like she is telling you her story. That's what these books are. I will say I find that hard to write. But at the same time, I don't know. It's how Frankie is. It's what the books have to be. Because if I could choose for myself, I would have gone with something easier, just so we're clear.
But I think though that once again, I love first person narrative. So for me,
Yeah.
as a reader, I think we sort of stand next to that character and we see from that character's eyes, and we don't know what's going on in the background, which is a great thing for a thriller because just like Frankie, we have to see what unfolds.
Yeah.
And
I think there's an intimacy to it because,
I agree.
these books aren't just suspense books. They're really Frankie's journey, they're Frankie's story. So you're right. You have to experience it through her eyes.
And so Frankie is a bit of a loner, I would say, as are most of the characters in this book, because I don't think you can go to an atoll and be the most social person. You've got to be able to contain yourself. But I find that even in Frankie's aloneness, I found that she was really so wonderful in the fact that she connected with so many people, but I don't think her character sees that connection as easily as maybe the reader sees it.
Well, and I think Frankie's like a lot of introverts. It's not that she doesn't like people. You could argue she's an excellent people person. She has to be. The crux of her job is being able to go anywhere, immerse herself, get to know the locals, and ask them questions in a way they actually want to answer them. Because, she's not the cops. No one has to do anything for her. So she's really personable and engaging. And I think you could argue she genuinely likes people and she has a lot of empathy for them. She just, that deeper connection or that she recharges by herself. She feels safest by herself. But then she also feels like there's something wrong with her because isn't she supposed to want to be with other people? But she doesn't.
No. I will say that one of the things I loved about Frankie is I've been single my entire life, and I'm okay with that. Most of my friends are coupled up, but I'm okay being single. I also think you travel easiest being single or by yourself because you get to make the choices of right or left or straight forward or turn around and go back. So
I think there's a phrase like when I went through my divorce, a lot of my friends used, do you feel liberated or lonely? And I would argue, Frankie and yourself, you feel liberated.
absolutely.
So absolutely go you. The other thing I do like about Frankie's journey is I feel she's a little bit of the anti-social media. Our lives or what life should be is so packaged right now. we're surrounded by these images on, Instagram and the TV shows, like your
Sure.
house should look like this, your relationship should look like that. This is what Mother's Day should look like. This is what success looks like. And Frankie just can't do any of that. It's not her thing. And she's at her best when she really does just go at it alone. But again, she has that anxiety we were talking about. Is something wrong with her? Why isn't she more, normal? And I
Right.
think we can all relate to that. We maybe aspire to some of the stuff we see, but none of us actually lead those lives. We're all sitting
No,
around.
and if you get too into it, is so much pressure on you to be
Yeah.
perfect. No one's perfect. That concept doesn't exist. I do like the fact that she embraced that. And of course, I fly a lot. I mean, I'm practically a flight attendant, but Frankie has never been on a plane,
No.
which I loved that because that adds yet another element of suspense. Because Frankie has to do a lot of things in this book that are not normal for her in her everyday life.
And
So
Frankie's mode of transportation is generally a Greyhound bus. So this was a big step up for her. And I'm like you, I travel all the time. So it was really fun to try to like write about an airport from an outsider's point of view. And I'm like, yeah, it's the place most mistaken for a refugee camp is really what the average airport looks like right now.
oh, that is so true, Lisa. And even the serial killer says we could have gotten you a plane here. You didn't have to take the bus. So I described yesterday, I went to a Mother's Day lunch with a dear friend of mine, and I was telling her you were coming on today. So I was giving her a little bit of the feel of the book. And I started just at the beginning, and she said to me something that I noticed, that this book is very women positive.
Yeah.
And strong women at that. And I'm assuming that was something that you set out to do.
I think that's just something I am, to be honest. I
I
can't
love that.
imagine writing anything that is not.
I love that answer, Lisa, because I think that is so wonderful. As I'm such a feminist, I always say none of us got here without a woman. The woman has to come first. That's just the way it has to happen. So when I
I
read a
like
book,
that. I'm going to use that quote too, just so
please.
we can swap quotes here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so now I'm going to quote something that one of your characters says towards the end of the book, that she wasn't sure if an atoll or this particular island wanted to be developed. How did you feel about that while you were on an atoll? Do you feel that sometimes nature says no?
So I was there on this atoll for the Nature Conservancy, and they were there doing ecological reclamation of coral because the atoll had been destroyed by the US Navy, for the record, who were using it in World War II as kind of a landing midway in the Pacific. And to see it come back, I mean, and it's weird because in the middle of the jungle, there are, these concrete bunkers. There are parts of the island or the atoll you're not allowed on because there's still unexploded munitions.
Oh,
So it was this juxtaposition of really the damage men do, and then where they could operate and they'd started doing their work, the extraordinary beauty that was coming back. And so I am one of those people. Mother Nature can be a real bitch, and we should listen to her a lot more and let her have some space. I really do think
absolutely.
so.
Absolutely. So I lived in Florida for a long time, and from the east to the west, they're filling in the middle of the state, which is the Everglades. And it's there for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not there just to be plowed over and concreted. It's there for a purpose. And I just assume that one day Mother Nature is going to take back part of what she wants, one way or another.
Well, the interdependence is kind of fascinating. And that's one of the things Frankie's learning when she's there at Still See You Everywhere. These 12 strangers, they're so interdependent upon each other. And they're interdependent on everything working exactly right in this area, in this remote location for their very survival. And I think we forget about that sometimes. We need each other. We need the land around us. It is all interdependence. I don't know why we've forgotten that.
Well, and to sort of promote a little bit of the thrillerism of this book. So Frankie arrives on this island and there are 12 other people. Then she has to navigate who she can trust and who she can't trust because she doesn't know any of these people.
Yeah.
But her skills are so magnificent, and you've written a character that really inserts herself. It's hard to fly under the grid. It is possible in this world, but basically all of these people are flying under the grid one way or another. And Frankie navigates that. How fun was that to write?
Well, yeah. So when I went to the atoll, this is real life, actually.
Yes,
All these remote research stations, and we have them all over the world from the Antarctic on up. They're served by contract employers, naturalists, engineers, the cooks who would argue and still see you everywhere. They are the most important members of the team because if the food's no good, everything's going to fall apart. But
that's
this
right.
is what they do. They're 6 months here, they're 9 months there. I met a bunch of grown adults that have no permanent address and wouldn't have it any other way. This is how they love to live. And then when you get there and you're greeted with things like, okay, do you have your appendix? Oh, it's too bad. It'd be better if you didn't. And you're like, wait, what? I'm not supposed to have all my body parts to visit. That was not in the paperwork. I just want the record to show. And I mean, there's rules about drinking because you have to muster. You have to be each other's backup. There's all sorts of rules that if you're even slightly pissed off, speak up now. Because again, you're isolated, you're remote. It's kind of like the summer camp version of The Shining. Little things can become big things very fast.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. And that was a lot of the fun in reading this, is to see, because you have an architect who's there. So there's a billionaire tech dude who's going to make this into an ecological friendly resort.
Yeah,
which,
another trendy thing, but yes.
Yes, of course. And what we all know is that would never happen, because the minute there's a dollar to be made, that billionaire would be making a dollar. It's just the way of the world. So, but something small that you did that I noticed when I was reading is, because I learned this from another book. So Frankie has to pick sunscreen that is ecologically correct for a coral reef. And of course, that's not something I thought of. I swam around coral reefs in Florida. I didn't know that you were supposed to wear certain kinds of things. And I guess, so when you look at these atolls that need to be repaired, it is because what we humans have done.
Well, this place was wild. You have to freeze your clothes to go. So like when I was going, I actually had a black duffel bag in my freezer. It looked like I really had cut up a body and put it in my, and that's to kill off bacteria, seed pods, anything like that.
Yeah.
No Velcro, because that's a contamination. So it was pretty wild, the hoops we had to go through to try to keep things pristine. And it's an interesting thing because it underscores how easy things do travel. But at the same time, this is a remote, kind of pristine, self-enclosed ecosystem, and you're trying to keep it that way. And when Frankie gets all the way out here and starts to really, truly understand what does remote mean, because it also means there's no, hope of rescue and no chance of escape.
No, and that of course is something you ratcheted up every step of the way, Lisa. So well done. It was like everything that you are afraid might happen, of course, does happen. And, there's a crack in the cistern, and all I could think of is, if you don't have fresh water, you don't live. Yeah. And so, of course, and during the book, we find out that there's some sabotage going on the island. And then there again, who does Frankie trust? What can she say to who, and who can she say I might need some help to? That's another thing about being a bit of a loner. I think that most of us don't typically ask for help because we're accustomed to doing it ourselves. So Frankie actually has to ask for some help in some respects. And you've also given a lovely cast of characters, whether they're good or bad. I mean, the two cooks, Trudy and Anne, I just wanted to bring them home, because that they would travel really well, and they would probably clean your house as well as cook for you.
They became my favorites by far. I'm not going to lie.
Well, you did them with such love. How could they not be your favorites?
So one of the things when I'm writing a book, particularly something like Still See You Everywhere, which really is a closed room mystery. You have 12 people.
Yes.
I don't know who did it. I don't know what's gone wrong on the island. I can't, because I feel like if I did that, I'd communicate it through the characters. And this way, you're having to learn the way Frankie learns, the way I learned. I mean, they're all good, but they all have aspects to them. You're like, I should be more suspicious of that. So it heightens up the, who do I trust? Where do I turn? And again, you're in an environment where you really can't go at it alone. She has to be depending on her other campers.
Right. And you gave her some other campers to to enjoy being with as well. And of course, this is no spoiler, but there's a wee bit of romance in this as well, that weaves through it, and it weaves through it nicely. I mean, there's no romance that you hit the reader over the head. It's just some cute little things that happen along the way, and not just one, but a few of them. And that was a nice thing. So are you going to write us a
lot of bonding that goes on when you're stuck alone?
I would assume. I mean, after a while, everybody looks good,
Hey, when we first arrived, we were given the same lecture Frankie gets. Here's the morning after pill. Here's the condoms. We're like, wait, what?
Well, you got to be prepared. I mean, that's just the way it is. If you're not prepared, if you're not prepared to succeed, you're prepared to fail. One or the other. So one other thing I do want to give a little bit of nod to. So there's a loving homage to 12-step programs in several places in your book, and it was so impressive to me that it was just something that was incorporated, not only Frankie and Vaughn's sobriety, but just some of the things they say, which lovingly brought in some 12-step ideas. And I was very impressed with that.
I felt it was very important when I started creating Frankie. Why does she do what she does? What kind of person has no address, has no job, has no permanent stable relationships, but goes from place to place solving other people's problems? Now, one, we all know that's way easier to solve other people's problems.
Yes, and give advice.
But there's an obsessiveness to her. And part of that is it's hand in hand with her addiction. She is an addictive personality. She grew up with a very alcoholic father. And much like some in those situations, like from the very sip of booze, she's like, this is good stuff. And she spent a lot of her life, drowning in a bottle. And she's trying to use that as a strength now. She works each day on her sobriety, but it also gives her a lot of empathy for where she goes and the people she talks to. I mean, she's kind of been there and done that. She's not showing up to judge.
which is so lovely, Lisa, because that gives you yet another reason to root for Frankie, but also you realize that she does have a lot of love. I mean, I can only imagine in real life. I've read some statistics about how many people are trafficked and how many people go missing. And it's just heartbreaking because so many of these cases never get solved. So for Frankie's character to set out to alleviate someone's mind about what happened, whether it turns out they're alive or not alive, that's very important to Frankie. So it is a bit of closure. So
hundreds of thousands of missing people. So Frankie has a lot of books left to go.
She does, and it's an amazing, it's a scary and amazing thought that so many people go missing. We live in such an immediate society. It's hard to imagine anyone could go missing. So, Lisa, this was beyond amazing. Again, it's still See You Everywhere. I cannot recommend it enough. Lisa, do you have a website or social media you would like to share?
Absolutely. So on social media across the board, it's at Lisa Gardner BKS for books. And then the website's lisagardner.com. And if you go there right now, you can nominate the person of your choice to die in my next novel, Kill a Friend, Maim a Buddy. It's very competitive. Get your coworkers and family members to nominate you as well.
I love that. I think that's such an amazing idea. And I have a whole list of people I'd like to knock off. So I will be voting and nominating. Thank you again for joining me, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. This has been such a pleasure, Dan.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com. on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.